Well, is that a direct funding? We've got base, weights, and direct funding. Is that, do we just move that down to the direct funding possibly?
So
Go ahead.
that might be certainly direct funding. I'm thinking out loud right now, and I want y'all to think with me. So predominantly VPK is a fiscal based, an at-risk need, based on finances. However, you have a target of a percentage that you want to meet that, but then there's also that buffer of they may not meet the finance need. You've met your threshold and you have a few spots available. Do you believe moving it to direct funding that should not impact that truth? So we're saying keep the process the same. And you follow what I'm saying here?
Yes.
Yeah, I do. The big question I have is, might this model change that? And so I think what you're saying makes sense. Keep it the same, period.
Yeah, and I'm one of, I think, 2 systems in the state, maybe 3, that don't have VPK. So I'm out of my depth here. So when you say keep it the same, do we tell me what that means to the purposes of this document?
Sure. I like moving it to direct funding. It definitely needs to be a part of the funding model. I simply wanted to lift up, by and large, the bulk of your students served are going to meet a financial need. Now, there may be spots for students with disability. There may be spots that you can have sort of this waiting list and students get in that maybe don't meet that fiscal need. It's rare, but I certainly don't want anything to change with how it is structured. I think it's a positive program for our students who are identified for that service.
Gotcha. All right, Penny. So I think we're going to cut and paste that down into direct funding, I believe, is the thought. All right. Anything else that stands out from your own feedback you've received or feedback you've reviewed?
I just want to be clear on the base RTI support. We're talking about personnel ? We're talking about curriculum materials. What are we saying with support?
Let's put, I think that's a good point. And maybe, Penny, we put in parentheses like we are with some other things, put personnel, personnel, comma, materials. Is that?
I think I would use the word interventionists.
Yep. Okay. Instead of personnel, just say interventionists.
Well, let me toss this out. Superintendents and those, in the trenches know what that means. Do all those decision makers know what that means?
Yeah, I think personnel is probably a more equalized term.
Yeah, because we have, y'all probably do too. We have, teachers, interventionists, but then we also have teacher assistants that have to help them out and cover small groups. So.
Hey, Ted, and the coordinated school health piece, and I know we're not supposed to mention anything in the EP already. Does that include all your school nurses or district nurses? Are we saying that's part of that?
That's what we originally talked about, but should that be in parentheses as well, Ted?
It's a great point, because it's really coordinated school health is a specific program that I do think they're going to take and put into the base, but maybe it ought to be just a separate one, just say additional nurses but not, maybe not in parentheses, because I do think it's 2 different programs.
I do too.
Yeah.
In fact, the coordinated school health person's not really supposed to, be over the nurses, I guess, in some versions of it.
And I was wondering, should coordinated school health go to direct funding? Because, right now we're all in E-Plan and that's falling under a grant that we all submit. Should that just drop there so that it doesn't confuse the issue? Because nurses should be a part of the base for sure.
I agree.
Okay.
And when we say nurses, are we saying nurses at every school?
That's the desire from my standpoint. I think there could be
Yeah.
instances where you might need more than one nurse at a school, to be
Mhm.
honest with you. I mean,
We actually map services and we have more than one nurse based on mapping.
I know we talked about this once, but should flexibility for facility funding be a part of the base, or I don't know. I know we talked about that at one point, but it was early on. Some assistance with facility.
We did. We talked about facilities, both the facilities assessment, I think, and then also the facilities work itself.
Yeah, I mean, the very fact that we're on this committee, a fast-growing committee, fast-growing community, I think that was part of the discussion early on, is that there has to be something to somehow money coming in to handle all the capital needs that are coming with the growth. But not, there is money in the BEP, but how do you codify that to fit our committee's needs? I don't know the answer to that.
Ted, I want to chime in on that too. I was going to mention that as well when I got an opportunity. We're representing growing districts, and some of our districts are building new schools regularly. I think that this group is going to have to speak up for funding for new schools, or at least maintenance of existing schools, because other groups are not going to be as concerned about that. And that's one of the areas that's really challenging schools like Rutherford County school system right now. School districts that are having to initiate one new school per year or more.
Mm-hmm.
I agree.
I
So
pulled this, Dr. Horrell, I pulled this up. This is still part of those previous recommendations the committee talked about. And here in must-haves early on in your conversations, this is the statement that you had me add.
So I think go ahead, please.
Dr. Harrell, go ahead with that thought. I'm going to come back on Representative Baum's comment, please.
Well, my question was, it seems like that may be, is that a weight? I mean, we've talked about weights for fast growing communities and, or student growth, because the base would be, it goes with every single student, but I think we're talking about funds beyond that. There are some school systems where the student would not need to carry the funds for, a massive capital project. So does that become a weight?
I'm struggling with how to answer it, honestly.
Yeah.
It's initially I thought you could, the direct funding, I'm not real sure is the right place for it either, because how do you get the money to the places that need it without penalizing other districts that might not need it? How do you put that in a formula? I mean, everybody needs maintenance of facilities, but not everybody is growing and needs to build new buildings. So
it's not only I agree with the construction and capital costs, but it's not only that. If you're building a new building, you've got to staff that building with additional, janitorial staff, principals, I mean, it's not 1 + 1. You just move things over. I mean, when you have two different facilities, there's an additional need there. I think a weight makes sense to me.
I'm going to chime in on that too. That's my gut feeling too. Most of what I've heard in our community in Williamson is weight related. Students with disabilities, growth expenditures, et cetera, when we're spending 3+ times more per student on students with disabilities. So those weight issues are going to be for us, the critical pieces. So I agree with that ought to go to weight.
Okay.
And Dr. Harrell, what I was going to say on Representative Baum's comment, I think the weight's probably the way to go. But going back to fast-growing communities, what we're going to see, I believe, in West Tennessee, there from Arlington going back toward Haywood, Madison County, I don't know how many schools we're going to have to build, but if as many people move in as we anticipate, we will be building schools. Maybe not as fast as Williamson County has had to, but it's going to be a rapid expansion of the educational needs there in West Tennessee. So appreciate him bringing that up.
Well,
Yep.
I think Rutherford and Representative Baum can confirm this. Rutherford's been growing slightly faster than us, and it is a major issue for our county commissions.
And to go back to the base, I want to clarify a question, because what about, I know that we talked about maintenance of buildings, we have older buildings, and should that cost be in for every student? And are we adding that in the base?
I think we should.
That's different than a new campus, but we have to consider that every student should have a cost of building maintenance, repair, because we're always having to do work within our schools to repair or improve.
Yep. Okay.
And so I want to go back to the weights there. So are we going to keep the construction piece in the weights, or are we going to put it in the base?
I think in terms of, well, I guess you've got the situation where sometimes you need to construct a new school because your existing school is old and inadequate. And then sometimes you've got to construct a new school because you're growing so fast, you don't have enough buildings to put the kids in. I think our conversation so far has been about the latter. But certainly the question is, how do we account for the former? You got a building that's falling apart and, is no longer adequate to serve the needs of the kids. Do we say construction cost? You got two categories: construction costs due to expansion, and then construction costs due to aging facilities. I mean, is that a weight?
Dr. Harrell, I think that's a good way to approach it. Maybe a better way, but I like that avenue.
Okay.
Yes, because I'm currently in Tullahoma in a situation where we are in a building project on an older campus. We're trying to add on to it and build a newer campus attached to it, and then use the older building for another space.
Let me toss out this idea, and I think Kat's implied it. Base for maintenance, weight for growth.
I can put that.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to jump back to the base. I thought we had talked about technology being incorporated into the base, whether that's cybersecurity or your hardware, software. And I've had several sidebar meetings with leaders and South Central folks, so it may not have been in this group, but I'm wondering, should that be in the base for all students, technology?
I think the answer is yes. Yeah, let's add that.
And
Hey,
I don't
back up.
mean to monopolize, but what about CTE director? I'm in a situation where right now I have a 0.18 paid for CTE director. I believe each system that has a high school should have at least one.
Okay.
Ted and I will say amen to that right now.
Absolutely.
I'm a little confused with the guidance that we have that says if it's already in the BEP, you're not supposed to consider it here. But, I think some of the things we're talking about, there's fractions of them in the BEP, and obviously what we're talking about is making sure they're whole. And so I don't know if you have to describe that differently on your page or if it's self-explanatory or what, but just a thought.
It's a valid thought for sure. All right, and we can continue to add, but my understanding is that what they would like is for us to kind of rank these in order of priority, to the extent that we can. And I don't know that it has to be numbered. We could just, bullet them in the order, if we make that known, or we could put it in numbers. But I know we need all of it, but I think that's what they're asking for. When you look at this list, do we have a consensus on which of these things are first? If you could only get one that would be added that you're not having covered now, what would it be?
Nurses are up there for me.
That's the first one that came to my mind too.
That was what came out of the BEP recommendation this year, was nurses number one.
All right. And then I'm just spitballing. Is it, well, I think we've talked a lot about social workers, behavior specialists, special needs, any of those that?
Could we put social workers and behavior specialists on the same line? Because that's really about those mental health supports, which I think is what we're getting at.
Yep. Great. Okay.
This is Annette. What about our regular counselors? We talked about that. I think that's noted in the list below that that Penny showed previously, but we don't have counselors specifically noted up at the top.
Yep.
Could that join the other two on number 2?
I think it could, as long as they're separate people. So I think that's important to note, but as long as the emphasis is placed on, the mental health component.
I think that's a good example of where, counselors clearly are in the BEP, but they're certainly not to the ratio that's, recommended nationally or something like that. So
Right.
That's one of those examples where, what do you do? It's in the BEP, but what we're talking about is bring it up to the national standards or the higher standards.
Yeah, I agree. I think we specifically make mention of that we want it at national standard at a minimum, and every school should have one.
Right.
Good. K2 class size, I'm tending to want to rank it high just because it's a big number. You're obviously talking a lot of personnel there.
I agree with that, and the support that you need at the early grades to ensure readiness for continuation.
Mm-hmm.
Do you need to put and support at the end of that because that kind of follows it? Yeah, that'd be.
There's a capital element to that as well, that all these schools across the state have been built for the existing PTR. And if there's a massive change, it blows up every school building too.
Mm-hmm.
And Jason, you need to take maintenance of existing buildings and prioritize it now, because that kind of follows that. Maintenance, and I might put a /maintenance and /renovation of existing buildings, because for people who, may not know the difference when they're talking about it, because if you have to add on, that's different than just the daily regular maintenance.
Okay.
I think what you're talking about in general is an overall capital component, whether it's replacing an existing building or building a new building. It's, you got a replacement cost. Every, business facility plans in their budget a replacement cost, because they know at some point in time they're going to have to either replace the building or do some kind of modifications to it.
I'm just going to throw out technology, and if we could maybe add a parenthesis to cybersecurity, hardware, software, personnel.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to suggest we consider safety somewhere next. I'm not sure if that should go before technology or after, but in terms of SROs and assistant principals and what they both bring to the school safety component. Assistant principals also help with all those things related to mental health when in terms of behavior and that sort of thing. They're really integral in different components of all that.
I agree.
I don't know if those should be listed together or separately in terms of ranking, but somewhere in that range.
Let's make assistant principals its own, just because obviously they have an academic need to. I wouldn't want to get out there that we want assistant principals just for safety, you know.
Could we add on assistant principals, 1 per school, as we have in
Absolutely.
some other areas?
Let's do.
I have 4 without them.
Put at least 1 per
At
school.
least, yeah, at least.
Let me ask on the assistant principals, 1 per school. I mean, is there a class size or a school size that dictates one, or you just said you have a system that does that there's 4 needed? Tell me what we're talking about there, please.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember what the BEP calls for. We have a staffing standard, right, that we submit to our commission on that.
We
So,
had the same, but I think even in a small population elementary school, 15 or 20 years ago, I might have argued maybe you just needed a principal. Now, with all of the things that administrators have to deal with, I think they need at least 1 other person. That's why I wanted to go back and put at least 1, where you at least have some help, even in those small populations, and then have your ratios moving forward, like Jason said, with the bigger the population, then have a threshold where you add 1. I think everybody pretty much does that.
I can't recall, but I think the way the BEP is set up is that some of these very small schools, rural schools, they don't even have the BEP funding for a full principal because it's done by, again, a ratio or a number. So we got to be sure that happens.
Mhm.
I mean, principal and assistant principals, at least 1 per school.
Yeah, good point. All right, I'm kind of feeling RTI support next, maybe. Does that seem right? That's a big part of what we do now.
and I don't want to get lost on number 7, but it's not at least 1 per school, but at least 1 of each per school. Because right now I have 4 schools that have 1.
Yep. Good catch.
Would the special needs pre-K and early childhood be a natural fit for number 9, or
I think so.
are you all?
Who's got the next one? Gifted.
I want to scroll down while you all are thinking too, and just so you see some of these that you talked about early on as some of the must-haves. And is there a place for those in the base?
I think we definitely need to include instructional materials. All students, that should be a part of the base, certainly.
Where should it go?
Higher than 10. way back up to the top of the list, probably. I'll defer to you folks, but a lot of money goes into.
Can you scroll up? I can't see what our, yeah, thank you. I would say it could be the number 5 and technology could come down potentially.
I like that.
Excuse me, but let me ask now, why is instructional materials not already in the BEP formula already? Am I missing something?
No, it is in the formula. That has been noted. So are we saying adequate funding for instructional materials, or? I think Senator Rose makes a good point. If we said we're not gonna say teachers, but everybody okay with that? Adequate funding? Are we there?
Okay.
All right, we got a few more to fill in. Maybe if you could scroll back down. All right, we've got nurses, we got counselors, we got most of what's in buildings. Transportation, dual enrollment. I think that's in the outcomes one, I believe. RTI we've talked about. Summer programs we don't have up there.
I thought I saw on your list you had professional development down on that must have it. Is that on down?
There it is, professional development master plan.
Again, that's another one it's in probably in the BEP at some level, but that's required for teacher licensure. So you need to be sure that there's an adequate professional development in there. I don't know how much more you're talking about there, but maintain their licenses.
Let's put it in there.
Well, and in addition to maintaining licensure, it's about staying current with pedagogy and trends and what research is telling us.
Well, you would hope that the professional development that you get is obviously relevant, but that's a good point.
All right, we've got translators and interpreters. Does that go at 12 or does that need to go higher? We feel, and we can shift them all around as much as we want to. Okay. Transportation costs we had on our list. If any of this doesn't feel right in terms of where it sits,
I think when you get down to this level, we all know that it ought to be there, but there's, you can't differentiate between 10 through 15 probably.
Fair enough. All right, let's just throw them all on there then.
And I think that's important to say it that way too. Otherwise, people might think that, we're saying this is 10, this is 11, this is 12. I think I would, in the report, say that, it's hard to differentiate at that level, but these are things that we all believe need to be in the base.
I agree, and that might be an argument for making them bullets instead of numbered, so nobody thinks we're trying to quantify that gifted kids are
right.
The 15th most important thing in the new formula.
And on 16, I was thinking a CTE director, at least one per district.
Ted, can we get away with not numbering them?
I feel like we can.
I would say that we could for 10 through 10, 10 and beyond, or 11 and beyond, some number down below. I think we want to show that those top 10 or something, we feel that, there are a certain amount of these are definitely priority, but at some point in time, you can't differentiate from down below is the way I would say it.
And Penny, I think our list is starting with number 2 right now when you get because I think up at the top.
Yeah, I noticed that too. And I promise I will clean it up.
Okay.
I'll clean all of it up.
You're doing a masterful job.
Absolutely. All right. So I think at this point, though, we got everything in there from the base. Is that right? Do we think we did? It's 12:42 just in terms of time benchmarking, although this is the most substantial one we've been asked to look at.
I'm going back to some of my notes. I don't know if this is appropriate, but what about one director of schools for every district? Because currently that's not funded at that level.
That's correct.
I might have that in the higher up, whether it's, clearly the school needs to have a director, a leader.
Guys, I hate to show my ignorance, but educate me and tell me the difference between a director of schools and a principal. What are we talking about?
Senator Rose, in our area, we say superintendent, but superintendent's director of schools.
Thank you, sir. I got it.
Yep. So I think we're saying, Penny, let's move director of schools, one per district. Maybe we can put it right ahead of principal and assistant principal, at least one per school.
Yeah.
And maybe we'll have 9 or 10 bulleted ones. There you go. Okay. Oops, messed up your bullets, but we'll let you fix that. All right. Anything else on the way out from the base? All right, Penny, we'll let you clean that up. And then she shares those with me, and then I'll give them the once over before we move them on up. So the next category is the weights. And I do think I don't know that we need to go back and Penny, from your experience with the other calls, some of them, I don't want to say no brainer, but I know that we're talking about EL, we're talking about special ed. I do think they want feedback on concentration of poverty versus, just the individual economically disadvantaged. Apparently there've been some different ideas on that. They've talked about the sparsity of how widely students are geographically spread out throughout the district. We brought up specifically dyslexia support, construction costs due to expansion, growth expenditures. I think for our group, as it was noted, maybe we need to put that construction cost due to expansion as our number one, since no one else, other groups may not be advocating for that to the same extent. I don't think that'll be taken to mean that's more important than special ed or EL, but
I think that's a good idea. I think it's our group's responsibility to emphasize that one. Rural school districts that are probably losing students are not going to have that one high on their list, and so that kind of helps us get it into the conversation.
Well, I'm glad you like that idea because I stole it from you in your earlier comment, but I agree with you. It's a good idea. All right, so the construction costs will be our number one. Penny, maybe at the top, we may want to put something in addition to those, commonly mentioned, I guess. I don't know how to, some kind of language up there. Is everybody comfortable with that approach?
Yeah, I think it's smart because you don't want them to think all we worry about for weights are those two. I see what you're doing.
Yeah, there's trends. They've gathered the trends from all of the subcommittees. And so, and Dr. Horrell, that's in one of those, that's in the PowerPoint, that slide that's got several of the trends from all the subcommittees.
Yeah.
Let's see.
I'll show you. Let's see, I'll find that real quick. There.
Yep, there it is. Thank you.
These are those common trends.
Okay, good. All right, we've got the direct funding now in terms of ones that we think should be added. Are there any of these? Let's try to prioritize these quickly if we can. I mean, I like the idea of the dual courses, and do we want to say AP as well? Of course, they have some trends. They have some trends too on that one, right? The additional dollars, they said the ones that have received the most positive feedback, additional support for fast growing, middle school CTE, innovative high school models, high dosage tutoring.
I mean, I know there's already money, probably not a lot in BEP for AP, but you could also, I mean, instead of dual courses, you could easily say something like EPSOs, money toward any of those courses that get college credit.
Yeah, and actually, as you're saying that, I realized they've been putting the AP course completion and/or passing under the outcomes based, and they've got EPSO under outcomes based as well. I think that was my fault. I guess the dual courses is more direct because it's just dollar for dollar. I mean, or student per student.
Okay, yeah, there you go.
I think the issue on the dual courses is that, when you get out of school, you get out of high school, you're eligible for the Tennessee Promise to get your college courses paid for. But when you take a dual course in high school, you're limited by the number of courses you can take. So I think what they're talking about there is expanding the dual course so that you don't get penalized by taking, courses in high school.
So how do we frame that, Robert?
I think I would just leave it direct funding of dual courses, just leave it as it, like that.
Okay, let's
Not
make that
tied to EPSOs. I mean, EPSOs is a broader thing, but I think that's specifically just dual courses.
So we want to say dual courses and EPSOs in the same line? Is that?
Sure.
Okay. We okay with summer programming being 2? These other ones we can probably just put in one right after the other.
Dr. Harrell, I hate to stop you, but tell me what an EPSO is. I'm with the dual courses. Totally agree with what you said there, Robert. We've seen where we've got students wanting to attend more, but they just can't afford because they're not funded. So anyway, enough about that, about dual courses. What is an EPSO?
We live by acronyms. It's early post-secondary opportunities.
Well, thank you so much. I've learned in my short career in the Senate to ask, because so many people know what these acronyms are, but thank you for educating the ignorant here.
Well, so Senator Rose, that includes industry certifications. It includes AP, dual enrollment. Those are probably the primary, dual credit.
Military, JROTC scholarship type thing.
Okay, thank you much.
Yep. All right, we feel good about the direct funding prioritization. It's about 12:52. We're going to try to honor our time if we can. Outcomes based. This is one that the commissioner said on the chair's call has been a hot topic, and it apparently is hotly debated whether or not outcomes should be considered for all students or just those that are typically thought of as marginalized or have gaps between participation. So I would tend to think, well, y'all share your feedback on that. I would tend to think from this group's perspective, we're probably talking about outcomes considered for all students, that if you have students that are.
Why would you not consider it for all students?
I wouldn't. Is there anybody that thinks we should? I mean, I wouldn't not consider it for all students.
I mean, you can still provide it by subgroups. I mean, I think it's important to provide it by subgroups, but I think I mean, we're trying to educate all students, so you need to have a all student category.
Okay. Everybody go with that? Okay, and then Penny, we had military. I thought was a creative thought that would be an outcome-based funding. Work ethics diploma we talked about. Anything else that we would need to add to the outcomes?
What about CCTE programs and certifications? Is that appropriate for this?
Yeah, industry certifications would be a great addition.
I like it.
What about RTI movement? That's an outcome when we have students moving through tiers, and we work very hard at that.
That's great.
Post-secondary enrollment could be one. Attendance could be one.
Attendance is a tough one to think. I've just having been in some school systems where schools, I guess, as an administrator, where attendance is more challenging. It's sometimes when you've got the poor attendance, you think you need more funds, just in terms of staff and folks to follow up. And
here's one, early graduation. One of the things I hear about regularly is that districts get penalized when a student graduates early because they lose that funding level. And we shouldn't, personally, I don't think we ought to penalize the district because we're accelerating the students through that. So where does that go in here? I mean, it certainly would be an outcome based, but you don't want to penalize a district for it.
That's a good point, and it's based on the schedule and the percentages of when we get funded.
it is a great point. Do we want to incentivize it or just not be punished for it?
I think you want to incentivize it. I mean, I think that's a great idea.
I will say for us, our basic approach is we give it when it's appropriate. We give that opportunity when appropriate. And so we haven't been pushing our students as a whole to graduate early, but we're working through that with individual counselors and students for what that's worth.
But you don't want to hold them back if they want to go forward. And I think that's what's happening in some places, is that, you penalize the districts, and so there's no effort to do that.
Oh, I get what you're saying. Yeah.
Well, let's leave it on there as a conversation point, and if somebody needs clarification, we can refine it a bit. Let me bring up one that I just occurred to me that I don't think we've discussed. In terms of the base, I know this is kind of hard to think about. What about alternative school? That's something that we struggle with in our district, because it doesn't matter if you just got one kid or you got a dozen kids, you still need staffing or some options there. I don't believe there's any allocation currently for alternative schools. Is that something we could put in the base? I know we don't want it. I don't want it to be outcomes based, like the more you got, the more you get. Throw them all out.
No, I agree with what you're saying, Ted, is that, I've seen some very, students who don't succeed in regular school can succeed in an alternative school environment. There ought to be something in there somewhere.
Okay, thank you. Let's put that on there. All right, as we hopefully wrap up here. Yeah, thank you, Penny, for kind of scrolling down. We've made pretty short work of this. Obviously, if there's anything that pops into your mind, you can email me if you'd like, and we can make revisions to this recommendation, I'm sure. When's your deadline to turn this in, Penny? Do you know?
Once I correct this, clean it up, I'll send it to you for approval. I have to send it on to T and EDU today. This initial draft will be shared with the public on Monday, but it will be noted that it's a draft. And then in session 5 and 6, you all will look at the public comments that will be coming. You'll talk about the policy. And then if there's decide if there's any changes to this. Okay.
All right. Well, are there any closing thoughts or kind of final additions or subtractions or reprioritizations? Well, I said it. Go ahead. Yes.
Ted and Penny. Yeah, I just want to thank you, Ted. I mean, you're organizing these meetings very well. And Penny, thank you so much for what you're doing as well. It's really good.
You're welcome.
Thank you. And I was going to say this anyway, but I said it at the beginning. I think we got the best committee. I don't know how we did it, but we got all the best people on our committee. So thank you all for your engagement and your thoughtfulness and the ease of which you've made this happen for me as well. So I hope everybody has a wonderful Friday afternoon. Annette, we hope you get to feeling better and hope nobody else gets to feeling worse. So thank you, and we will adjourn.
Thank you, Ted.
Okay.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.